At the dawn of the 19th century, China under the Qing dynasty towered like a giant, vast, ancient, and proud. For centuries, it had been the beating heart of Asia, a land of silk and porcelain, of scholars and emperors, guided by the iron traditions of Confucius. In Beijing's Forbidden City, the Manchu court ruled with unquestioned authority, convinced China was the center of civilization, and that the outside world had little to offer. And for a time, they were right. Fields overflowed with harvests, artisans shaped wonders by hand, and a mighty bureaucracy held the empire together with rituals and rules older than the civilizations that now challenged it. But beneath the grandeur, cracks formed. A system once built for glory had grown rigid and blind. Corruption festered, officials clung to old ideas, and the empire, certain of its superiority, closed its eyes to the storm gathering beyond its borders. While the Qing still believed they commanded the world, a new age of machines, gunpowder, and ambition surged across the oceans, an age that would soon come knocking on China's ancient gates. And when it arrived, the empire would never be the same again. But the storm did not begin with cannon fire. It began with a flower, a bitter, seductive poison disguised as medicine: opium. At first, it slipped quietly into the empire, a remedy for pain, a curiosity from distant lands. But soon, whispers spread through tea houses and alleyways, then across provinces. The noble and the poor, soldiers and scholars, one by one they tasted escape. And they returned again, and again. Opium wrapped itself around China like smoke, soft and invisible, tightening with every breath. British merchants smelled opportunity. To them, China's wealth was endless: silk, tea, porcelain, treasures Europe craved. But China demanded silver, refusing foreign goods. So Britain found its weapon: addiction. Smugglers moved under moonlight. Ships anchored off Canton, silver flowed out, and opium poured in. Wealth bled from the empire while its spirit decayed from within. Officials trembled, society cracked, and a silent war spread across millions of souls. And when one man, Commissioner Lin Zexu, dared to say enough, when he seized the opium and challenged an empire across the sea, the West answered not with diplomacy, but with gunboats. China was about to learn that pride alone could not shield an empire from iron and steam. The first shots echoed across the Pearl River. British warships, armored in iron and driven by steam, carved through the waters like predators. Their cannons roared, thunder that the Qing military had never heard before. Wooden junks shattered, fort walls crumbled, and soldiers trained for ritual and tradition found themselves crushed beneath modern warfare. For the first time in centuries, China faced a power it could not command, could not intimidate, could not ignore. Across the empire, disbelief turned to panic. How could a civilization that once saw itself as the center of the world bend before foreign ships? How could gunpowder, once China's invention, now be its undoing? City after city fell. Trade ports opened not by treaty, but by fire. And in 1842, beneath humiliation and the smoke of defeat, the Qing signed the Treaty of Nanjing, the first of many chains that would bind the Middle Kingdom. Hong Kong was ceded, ports were forced open, and foreign powers claimed rights on Chinese soil. The dragon that once ruled Asia found itself forced to bow. But this was not the end, only the beginning. Because as Western powers carved their foothold into China, a new threat was rising within, not from foreign ships, but from the hearts of the Chinese people themselves. A storm was brewing, not from across the sea, but from the land beneath their feet. And soon, China would face a rebellion unlike any the world had ever seen. But while foreign cannons battered China from the coast, a far more terrifying force was awakening deep within the heartland, not born from steel or empire, but from desperation and belief. In the villages of the south, hunger gnawed at the people. Corruption rotted every office, and hope felt like a forgotten dream. And in this darkness rose a man who claimed he was chosen by heaven itself, Hong Xiu-Chuen. A failed scholar turned prophet. To the powerless and the broken, he promised salvation. To the oppressed, he promised justice. And to the Qing dynasty, he promised doom. His followers gathered not as peasants, but as soldiers of divine destiny. They called themselves the Taiping, the heavenly kingdom of great peace. Yet what they unleashed was anything but peace. Flames spread across the countryside, towns fell, armies deserted. The Taiping banners, marked by zeal and fury, swept across southern China, growing into one of the largest uprisings in human history. 20 million would die. Dynasties would tremble, even emperors would fear the march of faith-fueled rebellion. As foreign powers carved China from the outside, the Taiping threatened to tear it apart from within. The Qing throne, once unshakable, now stood on cracking earth. The empire was no longer fighting for dominance. It was fighting to survive. As the Taiping banners marched and millions fell, the Qing court clung to power by a thread. But even in chaos, empires do not die quietly. Provincial commanders rose, men like Zheng Guofan, forging local armies not out of loyalty to the throne, but out of necessity to save their homeland. Village by village, river by river, city by blood-soaked city, they pushed the Taiping back. Cannons thundered, brothers fought brothers, and fields once filled with rice became graveyards of the desperate. By 1864, Nanjing, the Taiping heavenly capital, fell in smoke and screams. Hong Xiu-Chuen was dead, his dream of a divine kingdom reduced to ash. The rebellion was finished, but the cost was catastrophic. An empire survived, but it did not recover. China bled, and the world watched. Foreign powers, sensing weakness, pressed harder. The French in Indochina, the Russians in the north, and in the east, a new predator emerged, Japan, sharp, modern, hungry. With every defeat, every treaty forced at gunpoint, China lost land, pride, and the illusion of supremacy. The Qing still wore the dragon robe, but the dragon had been shattered. Now resentment boiled in the hearts of the people once more, not only against foreigners, but against their own rulers. Another fire would soon ignite, and this time it would strike at both the West and the throne itself. Empires do not collapse quietly. As China staggered, defeated by foreign powers and scarred by rebellion, anger smoldered in its villages and streets. Foreign soldiers marched through ancient cities. Missionaries tore at old beliefs. Railways carved through sacred land. The people whispered, "China is being carved apart." From that fury rose a secret brotherhood, disciplined, fierce, and driven by nationalism. They called themselves the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. To the world, they were the Boxers. They trained with ritual and steel, believing spirit and tradition could defy rifles and artillery. To peasants, they were saviors. To the Qing court, a dangerous gamble. But public rage grew unstoppable, and Empress Dowager Cixi made her choice. She sided with the Boxers. She chose war against the world. 8 nations answered: Britain, France, Russia, Japan, the United States, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. Their armies marched on Beijing. Spears met rifles, faith met artillery, courage shattered against steel. The forbidden city shook, the Qing court fled, and when the smoke cleared, China was forced to kneel, paying silver, surrendering control, and watching foreign troops patrol its capital. The dynasty still breathed, but its soul was gone. Revolution was coming. By 1911, China stood at the edge of a storm. The Qing dynasty, once the ruler of the Middle Kingdom for centuries, was crumbling, held together only by fading tradition and fear. Provinces whispered of rebellion. Soldiers questioned their loyalty. Students, merchants, and reformers, once silent, now spoke with fire in their voices. And in the city of Wuchang, that spark finally burst into flame. It began not with grand speeches, but with secret meetings in dimly lit rooms. Men swore oaths to a future they had never seen, but desperately believed in. Among them stood figures inspired by the ideas of Sun Yat-sen, calling for a China rebuilt not by emperors, but by its people. When the first shots rang out on October 10th, it was chaos. Rebel soldiers seized weapons, rallied civilians, and stormed government offices. The Qing forces, stunned, uncertain, crumbled faster than anyone expected. And in that single night, an empire trembled. Cities across China rose one after another, banners of revolution spreading like wildfire. The Dragon Throne shook. The last emperor's court hid behind ancient walls, powerless against the tide of change. What began as a conspiracy became a nation's awakening. The fall of a dynasty was no longer a dream. It was destiny unfolding in real time. The winter of 1912 arrived like a silent judge. In the Forbidden City, once the heart of imperial power, the corridors were cold and still. Servants moved like ghosts, and ministers whispered instead of bowing proudly. The Qing dynasty, guardian of China for over 2 centuries, was breathing its final, fragile breaths. At the center of it all sat a child, Emperor Puyi, barely 6 years old, a boy placed on a throne built for gods and conquerors, now surrounded not by loyal armies, but by fear, confusion, and fading ceremony. Outside the palace walls, the world he was meant to rule had already slipped from imperial grasp. Provincial leaders declared independence, revolution banners waved in the wind, and in Nanjing, Sun Yat-sen, the doctor turned visionary, was proclaimed the provisional president of the Republic of China. The dynasty's final blow came not through battle, but through negotiation. Faced with a unified revolutionary front and abandoned by powerful generals who had once sworn loyalty, the Qing court knew the truth. The empire was already gone. In February 1912, under mounting pressure, the abdication edict was signed. A tiny hand, guided by trembling adults, marked the end of 2,000 years of imperial rule. The Dragon Throne stood empty. China, wounded and uncertain, stepped into a new era. No longer an empire, but a republic born from sacrifice, hope, and the courage to let go of the past. The empire had fallen, but peace did not follow. Revolution had opened the gates to a new future, yet beyond them lay uncertainty, ambition, and chaos. China, newly born as a republic, was fragile like cracked porcelain. Its people expected unity, freedom, and prosperity. But instead, they found the nation splintering. Provinces that once obeyed the emperor now answered only to men with guns, warlords who carved the country into personal kingdoms, each dreaming of their own destiny. General Yuan Shikai, once a pillar of the Qing court, now seized control of Beijing. He promised stability, yet his eyes burned not with patriotism, but with hunger for the crown the child emperor had lost. He dissolved parliament, silenced opponents, and when he finally declared himself emperor, the nation recoiled. The dream of a republic shook violently. Again. Outside Beijing, chaos spread. Warlords built armies like thunderclouds, each preparing to strike. Cities changed rulers in weeks. Soldiers marched not for a nation, but for a name and a flag that meant survival or power. Ordinary people carried the heaviest burden. Farmers lost their harvests to armies passing through. Merchants paid taxes to 3 rulers in the same month. Mothers prayed as gunfire echoed across valleys once filled with birds and temple bells. China had fought to escape the iron rule of emperors, only to fall into the grip of many would-be kings. This was not the peace revolutionaries dreamed of. It was the storm before a greater battle for China's soul. Out of the chaos, 2 visions for China began to take shape, born from the same dream, yet destined to clash like thunder and flame. On one side rose the Kuomintang, the nationalists, carrying Sun Yat-sen's banner of republic, modernization, and national pride. Students, officers, merchants, and reformers flocked to the cause, believing that only a strong, unified government could end the nightmare of warlords and restore China's dignity. But in the shadows of factories, among peasants who worked the soil yet owned none of it, another force quietly awakened: the Communist Party of China. Inspired by new ideas sweeping across a world shaken by revolution, they spoke of land for the farmer, power for the worker, and an end to the old systems that had failed for generations. At first, they were uneasy allies, united by the belief that China must stand strong and whole again. Trains carried recruits, classrooms filled with fiery speeches, and young patriots dreamed not of wealth, but of rebuilding a nation humiliated, divided, and bleeding. Yet beneath the banners and promises, rivalry simmered. Different visions, different methods, different futures. Trust fractured, suspicion grew, and soon, cooperation would give way to betrayal, purges, and war. A struggle not just for power, but for the soul of China itself. The empire had fallen, but history was not finished with this land. The revolution was only changing its face, preparing for the storm that would shape the China we know today. And so, from foreign boots on Mexican soil to the final triumphant echo of freedom, this chapter closed not with quiet surrender, but with a nation reborn. Mexico did not simply survive, it refused to bow. Men who had nothing left still stood. Leaders who faced impossible odds chose courage over fear. And a people who once saw only invasion and uncertainty rose to build hope from the ashes. The empire fell, but Mexico's spirit endured. A reminder to the world that true power does not come from crowns or cannons, but from the unbreakable will of a united nation. A legacy carved in sacrifice and sealed in freedom.